Good morning, dear friends. I'm going to hit mute just for our introductory comments. And of course, you're always welcome to unmute to comment, question, etc. Today is June 10th, the 30th of Sivan, final day of Sivan. It is Rosh Chodesh, and it's a Thursday. And we're studying the Talmud, the entire Talmud, one page at a time. Presently, Mesechet Shabbos, chapter 5, and we are on 55b. We are we're in the midst of a very important, fascinating, thought-provoking segment of the Gemara. It all began talking about culpability, liability, and the need to protest when something wrong is being done. Then we continue with talking about the results of malpractice, and particularly a situation in the book of Yecheskel, where even righteous people are being punished as a result of their failure to protest, which brings us to the broader discussion of reward, punishment, and a comment of Rav Ami that no one dies without sin, no one suffers without sin, which set up all of our alarm bells, and we didn't understand exactly what that meant, and we still don't. The point, I believe, is that there is ultimately justice, and Hashem has an accounting of what's going on, and that was our discussion. So along the way, we Nechama, you want to go in the bounce house? Okay, so close the door and go to the bounce house. Close the door. Okay. We need to close it. Sorry. And so that's where we're up to right now. We want to understand, what is this deal of sin? And the Gemara asks, please close the door, please. The Gemara wants to know, is sin, death, a result of punishment? Well, we have a text that tells us that Moshe and Aaron died and there was no sin involved. Oh, man. All right. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to try my best over here. We got some kids in the studio, making sure that everything's exciting. So the Gemara asks, figure out what to do here. All right. No, not your phone. The Gemara asks, hey, why do human beings die? So Hashem says, well, Adam sinned, so Adam has to die. What about Moshe and Aaron? The Gemara asks. And the Gemara ultimately quotes from Eov, Mikra Echad, from Kohelet, that there's one bottom line, there's one result for all of humanity. It's wired into creation and nothing to do with the misdeeds of the Jewish people. Now I need to take a second.
I'm really confused about this because Adam was supposed to die immediately after eating from the tree, and he lived for close to 1,000 years.
Yeah, but in the eyes of Hashem, 1,000 years is as one day. That's from the Psalms.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with it, because they all died.
Yeah, but before they ate from the Eitzadas, man was supposed to live forever. So basically,
That's right.
Yeah, the punishment was to die, but it wasn't necessarily to die immediately. It was to die at some point.
Bertie, can you
If your
hear me?
We're all going to die.
Yeah, if your pharmacies were around then, these Canadian pharmacies, people wouldn't just live 900 years, 800. I mean, they'd still be around.
The French
Canadians.
Yeah.
Bertie, is there a board meeting tonight?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, because I never saw an agenda. Okay, never got a notice.
Yeah, they didn't know. They didn't send out a notice. That's why.
The secret meeting. Okay.
They posted it.
Back for the moment. So the
Okay.
Brisa teaches that ultimately mikra echol etzadik l'rasha latoiv l'ra. Ultimately, all human beings die. It's one of the unfortunate but necessary parts of the human condition. So the Gemara continues on the same subject. Hu de Amar. What was Rav Ami saying? Rav Ami says that everyone dies with sin, but the Brisa says that everyone dies regardless of how we live our life. The Gemara says, "Who the Amar Rav Ami who says that no one dies without sin, no one suffers without misdeed? He is following the position of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. What did Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar say? Af Moshe v'Aaron bechet am meis. That the cause for the passing of Moshe and Aaron was not absolute innocence, which was the assertion of the previous Brisa. Rather, they too died as a result of sin. And by the way, I believe this is the common reading of the Chumash. We talk about the story of Moshe and Aaron hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And right afterwards, Hashem says, Yan lo hemantam bi, because you didn't believe me, lahakti sheni leinecha, to sanctify me before all of the Jewish people. Therefore, Moshe and Aaron are punished that they don't have the opportunity to go to the land of Israel, and they're going to die in the desert. So it doesn't say explicitly that their death is a result of the sin, but the Gemara interprets here, ha hamantam bi, adayin lo higiya zmanchem lipatar min ha'olam. Had you been faithful and carried out your role precisely, impeccably, well then you would still be alive. That is the interpretation of that story that would work out nicely along with the opinion of Rav Ami, that there's no such thing as a perfect human. And by the way, this is in modern times, this is a big discussion. Can a human be perfect? What does it mean for a human being to be perfect? We won't stop there now. We're gonna get there soon.
Actually, in this quotation, Hashem tells them that they will not enter the land of Israel. That is, it's not a death sentence. It's a sentence of not going into the land. And then
Right.
they died because the rest of the Israel had to go in. That is,
But so you're saying it's a cause and effect, but it's not the immediate consequence. It's just the inevitable
right.
consequence.
Right. That is, if they didn't sin, they would have entered into the land of Israel.
And then they wouldn't have had to die. So the assertion here is that they died.
Whatever their fate would be.
Right. So I'm saying that's basically we're getting to two different definitions of this pasuk. One definition, which is the opinion that says that everyone dies and it has nothing to do with your righteousness. Well, Moshe and Aaron were fine people. They did nothing wrong. But they had to die because everyone dies. They lived a nice long life, 120, 123. But ultimately, everyone dies. That's one understanding. Now, what do you do with the verse that Hashem is punishing them? Yeah, like the professor said, the punishment was they're not going to go into Israel. So maybe they'll open oil wells in the,
Rabbi, I have another big problem.
Okay.
Even the punishment of not going to Israel because of the rock. And then we have the history of Moshe Hake when he had to hit the rock for water. If
Right,
that is the kind of God and the way he rules, we have a very difficult situation.
You're asking you're bringing up an interesting point. It's actually our Gemara is going to make that assertion. You're asking if Hashem gives no room for repairing, then we're all in big trouble, right? That's what you're asking.
Yeah,
But
if I was accused of hitting a rock, I'll settle right now.
Our tradition and the Gemara is going to share that there are different degrees of hakpada. There's different degrees of. Give me a word here.
No, but there's also
No. Listen,
because Moshe
tzaddik,
who he was. I heard the regular explanations.
but that is the explanation, and it makes sense. So, Beryl, you're not Moshe Rabbeinu, with all due respect, and so you and I, we make mistakes, and Hashem is not going to strike us down immediately because we're not good enough to deserve that kind of our actions are not so consequential.
The expectations are lower for us.
The expectations are lower for people like us. A person that's a total tzaddik,
Yeah.
even the most nuanced mistake has graver consequences. I mean, Rebel, I know where you're heading to is correct. There are many ways to understand the story. As a matter of fact, the Orach Chaim, if I recall, brings like 17 or 20 different interpretations of the story. And it's certainly the case that there are many of the great commentaries that say that's not that Moshe and Aaron did anything wrong, or they certainly didn't do anything really that wrong. Ultimately, it was necessary for the world to unfold and human history to unfold the way Hashem intended it, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron had to. Kasi, can you close the door all the way so we're not disturbing Mommy?
Especially that he had to hit the rock for the water, so he automatically, Anyway, let's not go there because it's a whole other.
Anyways, the point is that's what the point is. There are two ways to understand the story in the Gemara. One, that it was an absolute sin, and as a result they died, and the other is that it apparently wasn't such a big deal, or it wasn't a sin at all, and yet they died. So that's our question: is death associated with a particular misdeed, or is it just part of the human condition? Good question.
I have to say something here.
Go ahead.
Before we go on, wasn't it written in the Chumash that Hashem didn't kill him because he hit the rock? He killed him because he insulted Hashem, leading the people to believe that he was the one who hit the rock and not Hashem.
I'm not certain the exact commentary that you're referring to. This is not explicitly in the pasuk. The verse can be read and is extremely deeply analyzed. So one opinion, just to broaden it for a moment, and then we're going to continue. One opinion is that Moshe got angry. He says, "Shimona hamorim, listen up, rebels." And so the commentaries say for Moshe to get angry, even in the slightest degree, that's a problem. Kasia, can you just close that door all the way? I don't want Mommy to be disturbed by my teaching. Just push the door all the way closed. Thank you. Possibly, Alan is referring to another commentary, which says the criticism is not what he did, but how he expressed himself to Hashem. But the bottom line is that is the story, and with Hashem's help, we'll have opportunities to explore that at more length. We're now going to get to a very interesting, it's a question that introduces us to a very fascinating point that's found in two places in the Gemara. It's found here, and it's found in Baba Basra, another tractate that we're going to see probably in a few years with Hashem's help. Here it goes. Mason, what's the deal? Is death, this is going to be another challenge to Rav Ami. Is death wired, built in, or is it because of sin? Well, it can't be because of sin, because of this next text. May say a challenge from the following brisa. Arba'a, and again, if you have questions, get ready. Arba'a mesu be'etyoy shel nachash. Indeed, 4 individuals died because of the snake. Because of the snake. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, and I'm sure we can all figure this out. They died because of the sin of Adam, not because these individuals did anything wrong in their own life. Basically, their death is a result, their passing is a result of the sin of the snake, and not anything that they did. These are 4 perfect individuals. Please sit with me. Here they are. Binyamin. Close the door. Binyamin ben Yaakov. Anyone can figure out who Binyamin ben Yaakov is? Folks, anyone? Give a holler. Who's Binyamin ben Yaakov?
Binyamin,
make sure you're unmuted.
The youngest son
of Jacob.
The youngest son of Yaakov, the full brother of Joseph. He was a perfect
Jacob.
tzaddik. No sins, no flaws. Says the Gemara or the Brisa. Another person, Amram, Avi Moshe. Amram, the father of Moshe, had a perfect record. He never did a sin that would deserve or warrant death on his own. Yishai Avi David, Jesse, father of David Melech Yisrael, King David. He had a perfect record. He didn't die as a result of his own misdeeds. The Kil of Ben David, and one of the sons of David, known as Kil of. 4 people, all of them have a perfect record. The only reason why they died is as a result of the punishment for the sin of the snake.
You want to pronounce Ishai very carefully.
All right. So we'll discuss this in just a moment. Let's just finish the paragraph. The Chulu Gemara, all of these are inferred not explicitly in the verse. Levar mi Yishai, all of these people, the fact that they only died because of the snake is not explicit. However, Yishai Avi David, Jesse, father of David. Mefarish Bakra, there's a verse that says like this: the Es Amasa Som Avsham Tachas Yoyav Alat Sava. It's a verse that's talking about people that were appointed to the military. The Amsa ben Ish Ushma Yisra Yisraeli Asher Ba El Avigail Bas Nachash Achos Struya Em Yoav. Without getting into the whole family tree, there was a close relation between Yoav, who was the general, and complicated personality in the story of King David and Solomon. And he is related, and it's describing that he's related to Avigail, the daughter of Nachash, who was the sister of Struya. Avigail, daughter of Nachash, sister of Struya. Well, you know what Struya was? Well, ultimately, we're talking about Yishai, and we're referring to him as the Nachash, the snake. Chibas Nachash Havai, was she the daughter of a snake? How does a human be the daughter of a snake? V'haloi Bas Yishai Havai, this was the daughter of Yishai. We see that the gentleman called Struya, who was the mother or father of Yoav, was the brother of Avigail. So we see here that why is Yishai, father of David, called Nachash? Basmi Shemeis Bitesh Nachash, the person who was such a perfect person, his only sin, the only sin that existed in his universe was a sin that was preconditioned and built into the world. I need to make a comment. They just need to check on my daughter, make sure she's not disturbing me in class. So some of you are feeling confused because it happens to be, and again, my Christian theology is not that, I'm not that up to date with Christian theology, but you may be familiar with the fact that there is a very big obsession. There is a big obsession with the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, the snake, and the original sin. And as a matter of fact, when you speak to a person, and I've brought this up before, and they start talking about sin and original sin and atonement, you know, most likely 99% of the odds are that they're heading towards a conversation about how could you be saved, God forbid to say these words, and they tell you some crazy guy whose name sounds a little bit similar in Rebel's words to the father of King David. We're talking about somebody who had no father, and he at least we don't know who his father was, and therefore he's disqualified for starters.
His father's name was Yosef.
Anyways, my point is I'm not here to talk about Christianity or Yashka, but although Christianity is a little bit obsessed with the story, that doesn't mean that Judaism has nothing to say about the story. There are very, very vast differences between how Judaism understands the story and how Christianity understands the story. The one thing that the Gemara is saying here is that until Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, mankind was destined to live in a more spiritual state and to live forever. Once Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, it wasn't an apple, by the way, according to Jewish thought, or most likely it wasn't an apple. But then death is introduced to the universe. It becomes part of the human condition. And the Gemara is saying most people, even though, their death is a human thing because of the tree of knowledge and the snake, but ultimately, even without that sin, we have our own sins because we're not perfect. And by the way, that's okay. We're not meant to be perfect. We're meant to try our best. However, there are 4 people that were so perfect, the only sin that existed in their universe, the only possible trigger for death, if the sin is a trigger for death, it would be a result of the tree of knowledge, the sin of Adam and Eve, when death was introduced into the world. And so this teaching seems to indicate that you could be a perfect person and still you would have to die. So the Gemara answers, where the Gemara is going to try to make order of the different texts that we just learned about the cause of human death. And now I need another 10 seconds. So that is the Gemara. Money. Who are the authors of all these teachings? If the Talmudic teaching, the Brisa that teaches about the conversation between the ministering angels and Hashem, they challenged Hashem. Why does Moshe have to die? Why do why does Adam have to die? Why do humans have to die? And they listed Adam and Eve, and they talk about Moshe and Aaron, and Hashem responds, people die. Right? That's the gist of what he says. If that's the case, then why doesn't our Mishnah, or Brisa rather, that lists people that died not for the sin of their own, why doesn't it also list Moshe and Aaron, who the earlier Brisa asserts were perfect people? And Allah, rather, we must conclude that who was the author of the 4 tzaddikim who died because of the snake? It's the teaching of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. It would be the teaching of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that Moshe and Aaron died as a result of their sin. Therefore, people die for their sins. So it comes out that there's clearly a prevailing view and interpretation that says that a human being could even die, could even experience suffering, even if they are perfect. And as we just read, in the text of the 4 tzaddikim were brought as an example, it is possible, it is plausible that a human being would die, would pass on as a result, or rather not as a result of anything that they've done, but simply because that is the human experience, the human condition. Hold on, let's just do a little more. All right, actually this concludes the first, or this made the major conversation. Again, the Gemara's question, our question: why do people have to die? Is it because we believe everyone's done something wrong and therefore they're dying? And the Gemara appears to be saying that no, part of the human existence is death. Unfortunately, part of some humans' experience is suffering. We don't understand it. It doesn't always make sense. There are broader themes, bigger parts to existence that we cannot fully make sense of. And it's almost being outsourced and blamed on Hashem. Yes, Hashem created the world. Hashem chose, or the world has different scientific necessary items, and that's part of the human experience. And that is the case of the Gemara.
Rabbi,
yes.
Why does this pop up in the Tractate of Shabbat?
So can I challenge you to, or someone else to help us figure out why it pops up in the Masechta, the Tractate of Shabbos? I'll give you the fast. Anyone want to explain what this has to do with Shabbos?
Well,
Probably.
Go ahead.
Could be. There are a couple of things. I mean, if you're talking about life and death, what to do with Shabbos, there are certain behaviors and activities that are associated with bringing life to the world, childbirth, and particularly with death and burial and tahara and a body being tameh, and et cetera, and what you have to do before Shabbos, what you can do during Shabbos. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers the question, but certainly there are issues.
Absolutely. So it's really a chain. There's really we have to have establish a chain of custody, or the thought process. The Gemara is sharing with us the evolution of a conversation about these themes in the Gemara. And the Gemara starts off analyzing Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah and why he's blamed for his neighbor's sin. The Gemara then goes on to talk about the fact that there is culpability for when your neighbor messes up, or your friend, and you have the opportunity to give tochacha that we discussed yesterday. From that subject, we quoted different instances where very righteous people are ultimately experience consequences because of their failure to protest, which leads us to the broader question of, hold on, is every time a person experiences punishment or suffering a result of a sin? Rav Ami says yes, and the Gemara pushes back very emphatically. And we therefore go through a series of discussions about individuals who apparently lived or experienced difficulty, pain, suffering, and even death. And it's not a result of their own behavior, but because of how our world has been structured.
Rabbi, before you leave the subject of Adam and Eve, I heard a very interesting comment. Somebody said that by sinning, Eve chose knowledge over immortality.
Yes? But it's actually not knowledge. That was what they chose. But it was an intimacy with, they chose to experience a dimension of reality, which part of it includes death and all the other misery and frailty of living in this world. And they were initially had the opportunity to live in a higher type of existence. Now there are sources that say that ultimately this was the plan all along. That Hashem intended for humanity.
If we ever need Teku, it's here.
Yeah. Now, Chassi, close the door all the way. Close the door all the way. All right. No, Chassi, come sit with me. Come sit with me a little bit. All right, folks. So first of all, we're going to do a little more, but I want to first thank everyone for your indulgence. Today was one of those special kind of days till we got started. But I'm glad that we didn't cancel, because you got to get a dose of Gemara every day, learning Torah every day. We're now going to start a new segment. This is going to be, I might say, one of the most controversial, if we haven't gotten there yet. Not controversial. It's really very important, but it's something that we think about frequently, and it's discussed frequently, which is what to do with some of the very clearly portrayed sins that happen in the Tanakh, and how do we look at the individuals that are alleged to have been involved in those sins? And we're talking about the top 10. I don't know if it's 10, but we're talking about the top tier questions. We're talking about a verse in the Torah that describes that Reuven slept with his father's wife. We're talking about a passage that describes some terrible crime committed by King David. How does King David ever hold on to his reign, and how is he intact with our greatest admiration and respect after the story that's recorded? And on with other events and accounts that need some making sense of, and this is the famous Gemara that does that. And so let's embark on this journey. Most likely the bulk of this discussion will be tomorrow, and Be'ezer Hashem, it'll be a whole lot quieter and hopefully more straightforward soon. And so here we go. Let's at least start now. Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman. Actually, no, I got to add one more thing. Sunday, I keep on mentioning this. I mention this every day. Sunday is the yard site of the Rebbe. And of course, the Rebbe was a big teacher of Torah, and the Rebbe actually makes a comment, and actually comments on this story, the Gemara that talks about the 4 individuals who die because of the sin of the snake and the episode of the snake. And the Rebbe comments about it, and the part that I want to share with you is actually very interesting. It goes back to in history. In the time of the generation that followed the expulsion from Spain, we know there was a very big renaissance of Jewish life in the city of Tzfat. And it was one of the greatest short chapters of Jewish history, where so much scholarship and important Jewish teachings were preserved, recorded, and shared with the world. So some of the great famous tzaddikim of that era that we know about, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, Yitzchak Gloria. You have the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, and a famous Kabbalist known as the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero. And the disciples of these three tzaddikim and many others literally are probably the highest and largest concentration of great Torah scholars. And so there's a sefer that records a fascinating little Torah. What happened is the Ramak was the leading spiritual leader and Kabbalist of the Jewish community in Sfas, and he passes away suddenly. And his student, known as the Arizal, gives a eulogy. And his eulogy was as follows. There's a verse in the book of Devarim, Parshas Kitzeitze, that discusses the death penalty. And it says like this, when a man will warrant the death penalty, and he'll die, Vitalita oto ala eitz, he shall be hung on a tree. And in Torah times, a person that was put to death for until sundown could be hung, not like the Romans would crucify or hang, but rather they would be on display. The Arizal said as follows. You know what this is really saying? It's explaining why a great tzaddik like the Ramak passed on. You think he passed on for his own sin? No, when a great tzaddik dies, and we can't figure out why should such a person be taken from us? What sin could he have possibly committed? Vitalita oto ala eitz, we're going to hang it. We're going to blame it on the tree of knowledge. Now, I wanted to continue here, but my kids are not making that possible. So we'll end on this note. And the Rebbe goes on to explain this Gemara and the story and how there are certain tzaddikim who it doesn't make sense that they died, but it's a necessary part of life. And until Mashiach comes, that's the way it's going to be. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'm sorry again for today's being a little shaky, and I'm grateful for your indulgence. Mir Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same link. Gesundheit and Freilich Chodesh.
We'll get back to regular link tomorrow?
Yes, regular link. Tomorrow's the regular link. Here, I'm going to jump
so
off.
Boring.
I'm going to jump off, but I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave the class on if you folks want to continue schmoozing. I'm just going to assign Mark to be the